All right, diving in today, folks. We're tackling Tommaso Campanella, a late Renaissance thinker. Lived from 1568 to 1639. Most folks probably recognize the City of the Sun, right? His big utopian vision.
Yeah, Campanella, though, he wasn't just a one-hit wonder with those ideal societies. He was deep into science, had his own unique spin on magic, and even a whole philosophy of natural religion.
A real Renaissance man, it sounds like. And to map out this philosophical journey, we're using the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on Campanella.
Excellent resource. They've really combed through his works, plus all the major scholarship on his thought, to present a pretty clear picture. So our mission today, if you'll accept it, is to break down that system for you. Like, what were his key arguments, and how did he try to change how we understand knowledge, nature, even society back then? And maybe some of it's still relevant now, who knows?
Worth exploring for sure. So to kick things off, let's talk about what lit Campanella's intellectual fire in the first place. It seems like he was deeply unhappy with the way philosophy was being done, especially that Aristotelian grip on everything.
Oh, absolutely. The sources paint a picture of a young Campanella in those Dominican monasteries in Calabria, and he's getting more and more disillusioned with traditional philosophy, especially all that Aristotle stuff that was just dominating the scene back then.
I can almost picture it. Monasteries, lots of books, probably not a lot of, hands-on experimenting going on.
Yeah, and that was his big problem, right? He felt that the pursuit of knowledge had gotten so focused on interpreting old texts that everyone had forgotten about, actually experiencing the natural world firsthand. It was all commentary on top of commentary, and the actual world was getting lost somewhere in there.
So instead of looking at the world, they were just reading what other people had said about it.
Exactly. And that led him to a conviction that became the foundation of everything he did in philosophy. He was adamant that true knowledge has to start with the things themselves. Direct engagement with reality through our senses, not just relying on what some authority figure, no matter how smart they were, said centuries ago. Pretty radical for his time.
And that's where Bernardino Tolesio comes in, right?
Yeah.
This guy seems to have been a huge influence on Campanella's thought.
Oh, massive. Tolesio, he had this whole system of natural philosophy laid out in his book On the Nature of Things, according to their own principles. And when Campanella read it, it just clicked. He saw a kindred spirit, someone who was also pushing for this idea of figuring out truth by directly examining nature, not getting bogged down in all these pre-existing systems.
So cutting through the philosophical baggage and getting back to the basics.
Exactly. And it meant, making sure our words, our concepts were actually tied to real things in the world, a connection he felt had gotten all muddled up, especially by the Aristotelian tradition.
And Campanella wasn't content just to be a fan of Tolesio's work. He became a real champion for it. In fact, his first major work, Philosophy, as demonstrated by the senses, is kind of a testament to this early commitment.
Oh yeah, at the ripe old age of 21, he's already taking on the big dogs, writing this full-blown defense of Tolesio's empirical approach. And he uses this brilliant metaphor talking about the book of nature. He says it's written by, get this, eternal wisdom itself.
Wow, setting the bar pretty high there for human philosophers.
Right, and he contrasts that with all the human philosophy books out there, which he basically sees as flawed copies of this original divine text.
I like that image. It really drives home the idea that the natural world is the ultimate source of truth, not dusty old books. And Campanella was pretty vocal about his admiration for Telesio.
Oh, for sure. He even wrote a whole sonnet praising him, saying Telesio had liberated freedom to philosophize. In the poem, Aristotle is this tyrant of minds who held back progress for centuries, and Telesio, he's the hero who finally breaks free from those chains.
A real call for intellectual independence. It sounds like Campanella's beef with Aristotle wasn't just some casual disagreement. It was a full-on philosophical takedown.
Totally. In philosophy, as demonstrated by the senses, he goes point by point, systematically dismantling core Aristotelian principles across physics, cosmology, and metaphysics. And he doesn't just rely on Telesio either. He pulls in all sorts of thinkers to make his case.
Showing off his scholarship a bit, maybe?
Maybe a little, but he draws on the pre-Socratics, those early Greek thinkers. He brings in medical writers like Hippocrates and Galen. He even integrates the latest astronomical findings and throws in some Renaissance Neoplatonism from guys like Marsilio Ficino.
Wow, he really did his homework. So it wasn't just about rejecting Aristotle. He was offering a whole different way of understanding the world, pieced together from all these different sources. Can you give us some specific examples of what Aristotelian ideas he really took issue with?
Sure, he totally rejected the whole idea of form and privation. this Aristotelian idea of how things come to be. And the four elements thing, earth, air, fire, water, Campanella said, nope, not the fundamental building blocks of the universe. He also challenged Aristotle's view of matter as just the absence of form, this privation thing.
So for Aristotle, matter was almost like a blank slate waiting for form to give it shape.
Yeah, but Campanella, he saw matter as a real thing with its own potential, not just emptiness. Like, take wax. It can be molded into any shape, but it's still wax, right?
Okay, so he's dismantling these core Aristotelian ideas. But what's he putting in their place? What's the foundation of his own system?
At the heart of it all, he puts the sun, or rather solar heat, he sees it as this unifying force, this life giver that connects everything in the universe. And it's not just a physical thing. He ties it to the concept of the world soul, an idea he gets from Ficino's commentaries on Plotinus. He even uses that quote from Virgil, spiritus intus alit, which means the spirit nourishes from within. And then he connects it to that line from Genesis about the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So it's this vital breath, this divine word constantly breathing life into the world. And for Campanella, the heavens weren't just these inert spheres, they were full of this life force.
So he's blending classical sources, biblical references, all to build his own unique vision. It's amazing how he weaves it all together. Now, we've got to talk about his philosophy of nature, which he really lays out in Physiology, part of his bigger work, Philosophia Realis. And it seems like he takes those Talesian ideas and runs with them in some really interesting directions.
Oh, yeah, Physiologia. It was a long project he kept working on. Its final version came out in 1637. But this is where we see him break new ground. One of the coolest ideas is his concept of space. He calls it a primary substance, something immobile and incorporeal, but it's got this inherent desire to be full, like it hates emptiness. And he points out that terms like high and low only make sense if you've got things in space to compare. It's all relative.
That's a really different way of thinking about space than Aristotle, who saw it as this passive container for stuff. Was Campanella going against the grain here?
Definitely. Back then, most people were stuck in that Aristotelian mindset. Space was just a consequence of things existing, not some active force.
And it seems like his view of matter was pretty radical too, right?
For sure. Aristotle and the Avarists, they saw matter as basically a lack of something, just an abstract idea. But Campanella says, no way, matter is a real thing. It's formless, sure, but it has the potential to be shaped, to be extended, to be divided, all that. Like that wax example again.
So matter's got its own inherent potential waiting to be actualized.
Exactly. And Campanella says God works with matter by using these two fundamental forces, heat and cold. Now, they're not substances themselves, but they need matter to exist. And these two forces, they're constantly battling it out, trying to take up as much space as possible. And that, he says, is what leads to the creation of everything. The heavens, all hot and subtle and constantly moving, that's heat winning out. The earth, immobile, dark, and dense, that's cold doing its thing.
So the whole universe is born out of this cosmic tug of war between heat and cold.
That's the idea. God sets it up, these two forces do their thing, and boom, you get all the variety of the universe. And he applies this to everything, how stars form, weather patterns, even the creation of minerals and plants.
I'm guessing he had a lot to say about living organisms too.
Oh yeah, especially us humans. And this is where he introduces this crucial concept of spiritus. He describes it as like this refined, supercharged form of celestial heat, made super subtle and mobile by the sun's energy. And the spiritus, this is the soul. It's what keeps us alive and lets us think.
So the soul isn't some separate, ethereal thing.
Nope, it's this vital force, the spiritus, and it's mostly concentrated in the brain. It flows through these little channels, our nerves, basically, and that's how it interacts with the world through our senses.
The spiritus is like a bridge between our body and the world out there.
Yeah, a two-way bridge. When something in the world stimulates our senses, it changes the spiritus. And those changes, that's what creates memories, imagination, even reason. For him, all these mental processes, they're all just different ways the spiritus reacts and interacts.
And his medical background must have really informed all of this. He wrote a whole book on medicine, right?
He did, and he was blown away by the complexity of the human body, like how each organ does its own thing, but they all work together in this amazing, harmonious way. He saw that as proof of divine design.
This idea of a living, interconnected universe where everything has spiritus and the sensus, this capacity to sense and respond, that leads right into his ideas about natural magic, right? Which he wrote about in On the Sense of Things and on Natural Magic.
Yes. Yep, right on the money. This book is where he lays out his big vision of the natural world. And for him, it's not just a bunch of dead objects obeying some set of laws. No, it's this giant living organism where everything is connected and everything, to some extent, can feel and react. And the core concept here is sensus, and he ties it directly to this primal drive for self-preservation.
So every single thing, even a rock, has some level of awareness and is trying to, like, survive.
Well, he says everything has sensus, but it varies, right? Like the celestial spheres, made of this refined active matter, they have a very strong and clear sensus. But something like a mineral, much denser and, more inert, its sensus is going to be way less obvious.
And for animals, how does this spiritus fit into the whole sensus picture?
Oh, for animals, the spiritus is super important. It's hot, it's super mobile, and it picks up on all sorts of external influences. Basically, it's the soul for animals, and it's what lets them do all the things animals do, from, breathing to figuring out where to find food. Campanella had this idea that it's all centered in the brain, this single spiritus working through this complex network of nerves, kind of like how we understand the nervous system now.
Makes sense. And he spent a lot of time comparing animals to humans, right? He found some surprising similarities.
He did. He was amazed by what animals could do. Like, their senses are often way sharper than ours. They have complex social structures. They communicate in ways we don't fully understand. He even thought they had their own medical and military arts based on how they take care of themselves and defend their territory. He even thought they had a basic form of reasoning, a kind of natural language, and maybe even some innate prophetic abilities like sensing changes in the weather or approaching danger. He even thought they had a kind of natural religion in how they interacted with the world.
But there's obviously a big difference between us and animals. Where did he draw the line?
The key difference for Campanella was this special gift humans have, something he called mens, the mind. Animals, they've got the spiritus for their senses and basic thought, but humans, we have this mens on top of that. And he said it comes directly from God.
So the mens is what sets us apart, what makes us truly human.
Yeah, and it's what gives us the ability to think about things beyond the here and now, to chase after big abstract ideas, to strive for things like morality and knowledge that go way beyond just surviving. And most importantly, it gives us free will, the power to choose our actions, something he said animals just don't have. They're pretty much stuck following their instincts. He uses this great analogy of Ulysses and the sirens. You know how Ulysses had himself tied to the mast so he wouldn't be lured in by their deadly song? For Campanella, that's what reason does for us. It helps us resist temptation and make real choices.
That idea of free will and reason leads right into his discussion of natural magic in the fourth book. And it sounds like he had a very particular, maybe even purified view of what real magic is.
Oh, definitely. He starts by saying how bummed he is about what he sees as the sorry state of magic in his time. Like, everyone's trying to summon demons and make deals with dark forces. But he's like, come on, people, why not study the real magic that's all around us in nature? He even calls out Giambattista della Porta, who wrote a whole book about natural magic. He appreciated the effort, but he felt like della Porta's approach was too superficial, not grounded in a real philosophical framework.
So Campanella wanted to explain all those seemingly magical things through reason and his own philosophical system.
Exactly. He wanted to reinterpret all that traditional stuff about sympathies and antipathies, those hidden connections and repulsions between things in nature. And he did it by using his own ideas about sensus and spiritus. He traced the idea of natural magic back to ancient Persia, where it wasn't just about rituals, it was about understanding religion, medicine, astrology, all these different ways of interacting with the hidden forces of the world. And he divided magic into 3 categories: divine magic, natural magic, and deceitful magic.
I'm guessing he wasn't a fan of that last one.
No way. He thought it was all trickery preying on people's ignorance. Divine magic, he said, that comes from a true connection with God, a pure heart, real faith. And natural magic, that's about understanding the inherent powers of nature and learning how to work with them.
What about faith? Did that play a role in his view of magic?
A huge role. He was adamant that genuine faith was essential for both divine magic and for natural magic to really work. It was about having this deep spiritual connection and a true understanding of the world. He believed that a person with that kind of faith could actually do some amazing things by aligning their will with the forces of nature. But deceitful magic, that was just a big no-no.
So natural magic was kind of like a science for him.
Yeah, kind of. He thought it was all about understanding the spiritus, this force that's flowing through everything. And he believed that strong emotions could actually change the spiritus, both within a person and in the world around them. Like intense pain, joy, love, hate, all these things could have a real impact.
Can you give us some examples?
He had all sorts of wild examples. Like, he talked about how a corpse might bleed if the murderer is nearby. He explained it through this lingering sensus in the dead body that reacts to the disturbed spiritus of the killer. And he talked about weapon salves, how treating the weapon could somehow heal the wound. He thought it worked because of some connection in the spiritus, some echo of the event itself. And then there were those stories about, like, a sheepskin drum shattering when a wolfskin drum is played.
Okay, that's getting a little creepy.
Right, but for him, it all came back to this interconnectedness in nature, this flow of spiritus that ties everything together. And then there's tarantism, that weird phenomenon where people bitten by tarantulas would dance uncontrollably. He tried to explain that, too.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. It was a big thing in southern Italy, right?
Yeah, in Puglia. He figured it was a reaction to the spider's venom, which introduced these harmful spirits into the person's body. He thought it messed with their temperament, even their imagination, almost like the spider's spiritus was taking over. And he also mentions this crazy surgery they did back then called the tropia nose graft. Basically, they'd take skin from a servant's arm to rebuild someone's nose. But the creepy part is, if the servant died, the grafted nose would supposedly rot.
Ugh. That's both fascinating and disturbing. But it shows how deeply Campanella believed in this idea of a connected living universe. All right, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the Calabrian conspiracy. This was a huge turning point in his life, and I'm sure it had a major impact on his most famous work, The City of the Sun.
No doubt about it. So picture this. It's 1599. Campanella's already had some run-ins with the Inquisition because of his support for Talasio's ideas. But then a bunch of things happen. He's studying astrology, he's hearing all these prophecies floating around, and he sees how bad things are in Calabria under Spanish rule.
Things were pretty rough in that part of the world back then, right?
Oh yeah, lots of poverty, oppression, the whole deal. And Campanella starts to believe that big changes are coming, like a whole new era is about to dawn, and he gets swept up in this conspiracy to overthrow the Spanish and establish a republic.
So he goes from writing about ideal societies to actually trying to create one. Pretty bold move.
It was, but it didn't end well. The plot was betrayed, and Campanella ended up in prison. And during his trial, he tries to defend himself by citing all sorts of prophecies, both biblical and from other sources. He even talks about the astrological significance of the year 1600, like it's this cosmic turning point.
He really believed in that stuff, didn't he?
Oh, yeah. He saw those signs and prophecies as part of God's plan, part of understanding history. Anyway, to avoid being executed, he pretends to be insane. And get this, to prove he's really crazy, they torture him. This horrific thing they called the vigil. It's brutal.
Ugh, that's awful. But it was during this time in prison that you wrote The City of the Sun, right?
Exactly. It's like this vision born out of those dark experiences. He describes it as a poetical dialogue about an ideal society totally in harmony with nature and reason. And it's a direct contrast to all the injustice and corruption he saw in the real world. The big idea is this body politic, where everyone works together for the common good, like a perfectly functioning organism.
Okay, paint us a picture of this utopia. What are some of the key features?
Imagine this. A city built on a hill, surrounded by 7 rings of walls, with these grand palaces where everyone lives communally. And it's in a perfect spot, climate-wise. No nasty winters or scorching summers. And one of the most radical things, everyone shares the work. There are no lowly jobs. Campanella was totally against that whole Aristotelian idea that manual labor was beneath intellectuals.
So a real egalitarian society.
For sure. Everyone learns all the essential trades and they specialize in what they're good at. But idleness, that's the ultimate sin in the City of the Sun. They even have officials who make sure everyone is contributing and that resources are distributed fairly. The goal is to get rid of that self-love that causes so much trouble.
And no private property, I'm guessing?
Nope. Everything is shared. Houses, goods, even knowledge and leisure activities. And this one is controversial, even for a utopia. Partners and children are also shared. It's all about raising the next generation to be healthy, smart, and virtuous citizens.
That's definitely taking communal living to the next level. What about education?
Oh, education is everywhere, literally. The city walls are these giant murals depicting all of human knowledge. They've got all the sciences, geography, history, technology, even images of Jesus and other important figures. It's like a walking encyclopedia.
I love that idea. learning just by strolling around the city.
Mm.
And what about the community of wives? That's one of the most talked about and often misunderstood aspects of the city of the sun.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Campanella was into this idea of selective breeding, making sure the best traits get passed on. And he thought procreation should be managed for the good of the community, not left up to individual choice. He separated love from sex. Like, people could have deep friendships, but when it came to having kids, it was a matter of, like, matching up the best qualities based on personality, intelligence, physical health, all that. Oh, and the astrologers would have to weigh in, too, to find the most auspicious time for conception.
It's pretty planned out.
Yeah.
So what kind of religion do they practice in this ideal city?
It's a kind of natural religion. They take some Christian ideas, like the immortality of the soul and God's providence, but they also have this deep reverence for the cosmos. Their main temple is open to the sky, and they pray to the heavens. The dome is painted with all the stars and constellations, and their altar. It's shaped like the sun, the ultimate source of life. They have 24 priests who are also astronomers and astrologers. They interpret the movements of the stars and figure out the best times for planting crops, making decisions, all that. They're like the bridge between the divine and the human world.
Okay, so the city of the sun is this radical vision, challenging pretty much every convention of his time. But then there's this whole other side to Campanella, this fascination with universal monarchy. How does that fit in?
Yeah, Campanella's political thinking can seem contradictory. You've got this utopian republic on one hand and then these arguments for a single ruler on the other, but it's all connected. Remember, the City of the Sun was originally meant to be part of a larger work called Politica, and he wrote tons of other political treatises too.
It's like he's exploring all these different possibilities, and he even grapples with Machiavelli, criticizing him but then using some of his ideas.
Totally. He was critical of Machiavelli for separating politics from morality and religion. Like, Machiavelli said you got to be ruthless, do whatever it takes to stay in power. But Campanella, even when he's talking about practical politics, he always brings it back to the importance of faith and ethics. He saw religion as this essential glue that holds society together, something Machiavelli just didn't get.
So in Monarquía de España, where he argues for why Spain should be this universal power, what are his main points?
He says there are three basic reasons why people form political groups: God's will, human prudence, and just plain necessity. And the most important of these, for him, is God's will. So a good ruler has to consider not just power and strategy, but also God's plan for humanity. And he thought that plan was revealed through history, prophecies, even the stars. He believed the Spanish monarch had the potential to unite everyone under Christianity, kind of like a new Cyrus the Great.
So he wasn't just thinking about earthly power, he saw it as part of a larger divine plan.
Exactly. He believed religion was the strongest unifying force, the foundation of a healthy society. And he talked a lot about prudence in government, not just being clever and manipulative like Machiavelli suggested, but having this true wisdom that unites people on all levels, their beliefs, their actions, even their material well-being.
And this idea of universal monarchy, it was tied to this whole messianic vision, right?
Yeah, he spells it out in his book, Monarchia del Messia. He believed that one day, humanity would be united under a single righteous ruler, a kind of Messiah figure, and this would usher in a golden age of peace and abundance. For him, division and conflict were the devil's work, while unity and harmony were the true signs of God's will.
It's fascinating how he weaves together religion, politics, and even cosmology into this whole system. Now we have to talk about Atheism Conquered. This one seems to mark a real shift toward a more explicitly Christian worldview.
Yeah, Atheism Conquered. She wrote this one in prison between 1606 and 1607. It's a turning point. He's pushing back against that growing cynicism about religion, that whole reason of state thing where rulers would use religion just to control people. And he takes on Machiavelli directly, saying, hey, religion isn't just a tool, it's a fundamental part of human nature.
So he's saying that people are naturally religious, it's not something imposed on them.
Right, and he's trying to show how natural religion and Christianity, they're actually compatible, that they point toward the same basic truths. In the beginning of the book, he talks about how bummed he is about this dark age where politicians are running things without any regard for God. And he makes this distinction between true philosophers who are searching for truth and living a good life and these shady politicians who deny God and just use religion to get what they want.
It sounds like he's drawing a line in the sand there.
He is. And in the second chapter, he goes all out, listing a bunch of objections to religion, including some pretty harsh criticisms of Christianity. But he doesn't stop there. He spends the rest of the book systematically dismantling those objections, arguing that religion is built into the fabric of the universe itself.
So what are some of those arguments he makes?
He talks about how you can see traces of the Trinity in the order and harmony of nature. And he defends the incarnation, the idea of God becoming human, saying it makes perfect sense. He talks about divine providence, how God guides everything. And he argues that death isn't the end, just a transition. And he says that evil, even though it exists, is ultimately part of God's plan.
It's a pretty comprehensive defense of religion.
It is. He even tackles the argument that false religions prove that all religion is bogus. He uses the example of medicine, saying just because there are bad doctors doesn't mean that medicine itself is fake. He also argues that the human soul is immortal, that we have this capacity for intellectual and spiritual growth that goes way beyond our physical bodies.
So what's his final conclusion about the relationship between natural religion and Christianity?
He says that Christianity, while it's based on divine revelation, it doesn't contradict natural religion. In fact, it completes it, perfects it. And he hints at the possibility of a universal religion that could unite everyone based on these shared truths.
It's a really powerful argument, but I can imagine this book caused some controversy.
It did. The church was a little nervous about his emphasis on human reason. Like, if we can figure out religion on our own, do we even need God's grace? It took a while for them to be okay with it.
Well, Campanella definitely wasn't afraid to push boundaries. And even though he spent 27 years in prison, he never stopped writing.
His output during that time is amazing. Books on medicine, astrology, religious devotion, metaphysics, theology, you name it, he wrote about it.
And he even defended Galileo, which took some guts back then.
Oh yeah, that was a risky move. In his Apologia pro Galileo, he argues that scientists should be free to investigate the natural world without being bound by old dogmas. And he takes another jab at Aristotle, saying, look, his ideas are infallible. We have to look at the evidence, not just blindly follow authority.
He was a real champion for intellectual freedom. What about his time in Rome? He was pretty tight with the Pope for a while.
Yeah, Pope Urban VIII really liked him. He even asked Campanella to help him out with some astrological predictions, trying to avoid a bad fate. And Campanella was into all sorts of practices from the Neoplatonic tradition. Like, he'd create these special rooms with purified air, use lamps and music in specific ways, all to try and harness positive cosmic energies.
Sounds like he was putting his magical knowledge to work.
He was, but it ended up backfiring. The Pope got spooked by all this magic stuff and cracked down on astrologers.
Poor Campanella. Always stirring up trouble.
He did have a knack for it, but even in exile in Paris, he kept writing like crazy. He oversaw the publication of his major works there, including Philosophia Realis, De Sensu Rerum et Magia, Atheismus Triumphatus, Philosophia Rationalis, and his big metaphysics book, Metaphysica, where he lays out his doctrine of primalities. He even analyzed the political landscape, writing about Spain's decline and France's rise. And get this, he wrote a whole treatise on palmistry for Cardinal Richelieu.
Wow, palmistry, that's unexpected.
And just before he died in 1639, he wrote this prophetic poem called Eclogue for the birth of the future Louis XIV, predicting an era of unity and peace.
Tommaso Campanella, a truly remarkable and complex figure. His work spans such a wide range of subjects, it's hard to wrap your head around it all.
Totally. But some themes run through it all. The importance of experience, the interconnectedness of everything through sensus and spiritus, and this vision of a better world, whether it's a utopian city or humanity united under one true religion.
His life and work offer a window into this incredibly dynamic period, the late Renaissance. And it makes you think, even today, about how we approach knowledge, how we build societies, and how we fit into this vast universe.
Absolutely. And one thing that really sticks with me is his emphasis on direct experience, not just relying on what's written in books. And I think that's so relevant today in our world of information overload. Like, are we so busy consuming information that we're forgetting to actually experience the world firsthand? What books of nature are we missing out on because we're too busy staring at screens? It's something to think about, for sure.
Food for thought, no doubt. Thanks for taking us on this deep dive into Campanella's world. I think we all learned a lot today.
My pleasure. Always a joy to explore these big ideas.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We'll see you next time for another intellectual adventure.